I'm Carolyn Holzman, and this is Confessions of an SEO. Our time together every week runs about 15 minutes, give or take. Fingers crossed we stay within that today. So expect Season 6 to be a little more SEO-ish, technical, listicle, you name it. Are you ready? Welcome to Season 6, Episode 7 of Confessions of an SEO. Now, I will start with a confession. I still haven't got that test write-up from Episode 5 where it's published online. But when you hear what I've had on the burners this week, I think you might absolve me from a little of that. So last week, we discussed the mystical listicle. And what a juicy topic. I think basically a lot of us are all looking for clues to explain what we're seeing. And given the enormity of the disruption in our industry, and with companies canceling SEO contracts and relying on output from AI, hint, that is not a good idea. I can understand why people are grasping for straws to explain the things that we're looking at. Now, for those who don't know that phrase, I did look it up to make sure. I was like, man, what does that mean? Where did that come from? And it originated from a book from 1834 by Thomas More. It was called Utopia. And it describes within there a state of despair in which a drowning person will cling to anything, even useless floating straws, to survive. And yes, it was that Thomas More, the guy who was essentially the fly in the ointment for Henry VIII's strategy of his marriage annulment thingy with Catherine of Aragon and the Pope. He made a movie about the breakup of Thomas and Henry's friendship that led to the execution of Thomas. So if you didn't think that an SEO podcast could make an applicable 16th century reference, think again. All right. Now, coming up in today's episode, I'm going to give you a little taste of what I've been looking at in terms of developing an alternate explanation for the decline of these listicle articles that were outlined in Lily Ray's article. And I'll talk about something that went under the radar this week in relation to Google's announcement of adjusting the amount of content Googlebot will now crawl before it just stops. And later today, if you're listening to this on February 17th, at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, I'll be on a webinar titled The Truth About AI Visibility. Your blog looks like a knowledge base to humans, but it looks like a mess to AI. And it's going to last about 45 minutes, and we're going to show you why and how to fix it. And yes, it's about Vizzex and how to connect your expertise in a way that both search and AI understand. So if you're on WordPress or HubSpot, this solution is available for you. There are more platforms on the way. All right, this past week was a high watermark for the Mystical Listicle project. And did you know that there are some self-serving listicles that survived this possible purge that was witnessed? And enterprise ones at that. They put out a video on YouTube trying to poke holes in Lily's conclusion that listicles were being targeted and pointed out to other listicles that are currently ranking in the SERPs. So do these verifiable facts mean that this was all smoke and no fire? Well, only for lazy people, and I am not that. For 3 days last week, I eyeballed over 80 listicle pages and a few more, going through a sort of iterative process of delineating what the listicle survivors have or do not have in common with the listicles that were punished. And remember, I'm looking at the exact same sites Lily looked at in her case study, even the one she noted where she saw a decline of a site, but it did not have the same type of listicle articles. Now remember, listicles are about the cheapest type of content to produce. Whether you're an enterprise brand or a one-person agency, AI has made producing these articles possible at an even greater scale. You know, it's almost like someone trying to get caught if you think Google's algorithm can detect AI-produced content. I do not. But I want to go back to the point I just made. I looked at the actual pages in question. Not them appearing in search or not, but the actual pages a visitor to them would have seen. And this is a huge missing piece in the case study, which I am happy to fill in. My goal is for all of us to experience leveraged learning. That's why I do these. Okay, enough on the listicles. This week, I thought the internet would break under the weight of all the articles and all the posts about Google's revision of the instructions to the crawling Google bots, which crawl our pages. Namely, Googlebot used to crawl up to 15 megabytes of content on one crawl, and now that's been reduced to 2. And it doesn't take much to get my attention when we start talking about Googlebot crawls. I've been monitoring the various Chrome updates to that particular bot. My data goes back to March 2022 when I saw the first Chrome update on a mobile Googlebot crawler. Note, and you may not be aware, but I do think it helps to know that mobile Chrome Googlebots, the ones that take the pictures of our content, they don't just use Chrome, but they update the Chrome that they use. Right now, the latest Chrome build, as of this morning, is tracking. It's at build. I'm going to read these numbers, but don't worry about it. Let them go. 144.0.7559.132. If you're into shortcuts, that would be Chrome 144/132. Or if you're looking at my data, it would be mobile build 181, as in 181. So everyone and her sister used that information about the change in the crawler limit to pretty much either scare people or comfort them. Because most pages are a fraction of even that reduced amount of 2 megabytes. Does it seem like, or is it just my imagination? Most of the SEO industry is playing some form of the telephone game. I think everybody's strapped for time or curiosity that they read one article and now they're like Chicken Little and the sky is falling, and they just repeat that to the next and the next and then the next. By the way, let's be clear, it's not all Google crawlers that were limited. By default, Google crawlers and fetchers only crawl the first 15 megabytes still of a file. Any content beyond this limit is ignored, but the mobile and desktop Googlebots are limited, and you can tell them apart in the server logs. The best article on this I saw was from someone who tested the bots, and I know why they hit some issues, but it's the testing and the observing what actually happened. Oh, I'm so happy. So they did, it's called a Google 2 megabyte limit test, and I really applaud their gumption on this, and I'm going to spend some more time going over the meat in there. What they came up with relates to a question I've had for a long time about the particular order of the set of crawls from a Search Console request. So more about that on a later date. I'll share that part. Their conclusion after their test was the limit is real, it's enforced, and Google gives you zero warning when you hit it. But here's why it helps to have an indexation expert in your pocket, because that's not the full story. It's helpful, but not the full story. I posted about this on LinkedIn. The 2 megabyte crawl limit panic misses the real bottleneck, and that is the time the Googlebot stays on your page. Technically, that's not the most accurate words to use, but either way you say it, it means the same thing. And in this way, non-programmers understand what the hell I'm talking about. Now, I used to test for the time on page in the early years of crawl or no crawl because, well, it relates to indexation. And in 2022, it was definitely still testing around 5 seconds. Someone in 2019 on Twitter also had done some benchmark testing, and it was also. So it seems it's pretty consistent that we're at 5. And I tested multiple pages this week via the Search Console's live test. And each one of them consistently hit 5 seconds. Now, it's important. These 5 seconds are important to know because it all goes back to how your page loads. So if you're only asking how big is my page, you might want to add in there, and does my critical content render in less than 5 seconds? So if you have a really small page, but your site for some reason has a seriously delayed load, that's important. What do you think would happen if all that optimized, juicy content loads after 5 seconds? If you're not sure, allow me to fill in the gap and confirm that Google can only index what the Googlebot crawler crawls. And if there are portions on your page that are not loading within that time frame, anything in those portions cannot be seen in that render crawl, which means it's not going to get indexed, and it sure as hell isn't going to get served. Not your page, but the optimizations you have below that 5 second limit. If you have them in there, they're not going to count for you. So if you're worried about PDFs, don't worry. There's a separate crawl. And I believe they have a rate limit space of 42 megabytes. No, 64 megabytes. And then there's a Googlebot video and a Googlebot image, and they also have the larger limit. They have not been reduced. So the real place, in my opinion, to spend time is on looking at optimizing the page load of all the items on your page, and do server-side rendering wherever possible. And then prioritize anything that's a client-side. Now, what that means is on server-side, it's what it sounds like. All that content has been broken down and is available in just straight HTML. And a client-side means you're waiting for the bot to open those up and start rendering. So what do you look at? Things like your hosting, because that's a huge one and more important these days than we ever had to realize before. So you want to cache wherever you can and really slim down the file size of your images. If you're not printing them on a press, which we're not if we're printing on our website. Remember, a screen is 72 dpi and it's an RGB color space. They really don't have to be the full weight, high resolution as if you were going to print them on a press. In fact, just remember, it's like the opposite. Aim for the worst possible image you could take to a printer, and that's what you're looking for your website. Now, I realize, whether I like it or not, somehow I've managed to become a strong technical SEO, mainly coming from this indexation research. So if you're not a technical SEO, find one. Well, that's it for me this week. Do yourself a favor, and if you get into the Vizzex beta for the world's first helpful content analysis tool, just remember the difference isn't more content, it's connected content. And this week's AMA is going to be exclusive to those in the beta, and that's going to happen on February 19th this week. Now, more than ever, AI makes the indexation of your content into Google and Bing essential, so don't leave it to chance. Check out Indexzilla, now the exclusive provider of the crawl or no crawl indexation reports, and you can find it at indexzilla.io. Thank you for listening, and until next week, I'll see you in the SERPs.